Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time zone you may be in for this. I'm Michael Kimmage, Director of the Kennan Institute. It's my great pleasure to introduce and to moderate today's webinar, and we will be focusing on the outcome of Germany's snap election and its many implications for German foreign policy, and we'll be taking a particular focus in the course of the conversation on the war in Ukraine and on questions that concern transatlantic security. Would of course like to encourage our audience to take a look at our email newsletter at the Kennan Institute and the many publications that we put out on these topics, and the podcast as well that we're doing. And we would of course at Kennan like to thank the Wilson Center's Global Europe program for co-sponsoring today's discussion. As a preemptive notice to our audience about how they can participate, please do send questions to the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will direct them to our panelists, and do include your name and affiliation when you do so. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers today, and I'll start with Torsten Benner, who's co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin. Focuses on many issues, including the interplay of U.S., European, and non-Western powers in the making of global order and at times of global disorder, and is also a distinguished expert on German and European policy vis-a-vis China, Asia-Pacific peace and security, and also data and technology politics. Torsten, we're delighted that you can join us for this today. Robin Quinville is director of the Wilson Center's Global Europe program, and spent more than 30 years as an American diplomat, most recently as charge d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, and in D.C., directed the Office of Western European Affairs at the State Department, and was also a Wilson Center Fellow before joining in her current role as director of the, as we call it here, the GEP, the Global Europe Program. And then we have we're very pleased to have with us Christoph von Marschall, is a Wilson International Competition Fellow at the moment, and on a more permanent basis, the chief diplomatic correspondent at Der Tagesspiegel, a leading daily in Berlin, and is an expert on Central Eastern Europe, the United States, transatlantic relations, and great power competition, which is, of course, the topic of the hour. So to overview our conversation, we'll have opening remarks from each of our panelists. We'll have a bit of back and forth among them, and then we will turn to our audience questions. And I think you know how to direct your questions, but please put them in the Q&A function. So starting in the order that I introduced our speakers, let's begin with you, Torsten, to say a few words on the implications of the election as you see them, the kind of key takeaway that you think you would like to present to our audience.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Michael, and the whole Wilson Center team. It's great to be on this panel with my wonderful co-panelists. Now, in terms of takeaways, I think you said, like, with regard to Europe, I mean, one takeaway is, like, we had an election where the campaign didn't focus on European or foreign policy at all. It focused on all other things, but we woke up after the election, and the now future chancellor realized that actually we do need to change a lot of things fiscally in order to be able to meet our defense needs in the future. And that's what's being discussed right now. The other takeaway, I would think, is that we're unfortunately a pretty normal country as far as or like we're moving toward being a very normal country in terms of the fragmentation of the party system and the rise of far-right parties. The AfD won more than 20% of the vote. It won all in the whole of East Germany. The Christian Democrats didn't win a single constituency directly. They went all to the AfD that were in the hands of the CDU before. And overall, we have 35% of all voters. If you take the AfD, the Left Party, and the Wagenknecht Alliance Party, together who support parties that are by and large pretty much pro-Kremlin in their orientation. And I do think that's quite worrying. Now, what's in store now in terms of European policy? I think the likely new Chancellor Friedrich Merz has been quite ambitious in terms of saying that he wants to intensify outreach to Warsaw, to Paris, to other European, and he has faulted Scholz for not having done enough on that in the past years and having been too close, putting all eggs into the basket of close relations to the Biden administration. How well this is going, we'll see, because Merz at the same time wants a U-turn in terms of migration policy, pushing back asylum seekers at the German border. If he implements this in a way that antagonizes European neighbors, that will kind of that will be problematic for his European outreach. So I'll leave it at that, and we can go to all sorts of other discussions later.
Thank you so much, Torsten. So a fiscal revolution, perhaps, in Germany with an eye to European security, and then Germany's unfortunate normalcy. It's a nice turn of phrase, and one that we probably will return to in the course of the conversation. Robin, let's turn to you for a few thoughts about the transatlantic relationship and takeaways from the German election in that regard.
Thanks very much, Michael, and it's great to be here with Christoph and Torsten. I feel I'm almost back in Berlin, actually. So I thought I'd focus a little bit on what the implications are of the election for the transatlantic relationship. And partly I'm thinking about this because I was at the Munich Security Conference when many of these discussions about what that relationship would look like to start began just before the German election, so a week before. In German foreign policy, stability is a very prized item, and generally they try to make sure that there is a lot of continuity in foreign policy, and working also within the EU framework. But I have to say, on the transatlantic relationship, since last month, I think we're moving into a phase that is less focused on stability and more focused on what needs to happen and what needs to change in order to have cooperative transatlantic relations. So it was clear that this Trump administration is going to be different than Trump 1.0. I think there's like 5 things that we can see that the German government will need to wrap into its foreign policy as the new government gets off the ground. And the first is that the relationship with the US, the scratchy point, is not just going to be about defense spending and capabilities. I think that was what was anticipated at the Munich Security Conference, that would be the focus of the US push for more defense spending and capabilities, Europe to do more in the alliance. And for that reason, of course, Ursula von der Leyen focused on how to adapt the debt ceiling for the EU and how to engage private banks into promoting lending that would allow for more defense spending. And I think German Defense Minister Pistorius under the last government has done a lot to encourage the development of more procurement of capabilities. But in fact, what's going to happen is a foreign policy that is going to need to effectively build a more European identity in defense and security, and also increase the capabilities of the European defense industry to build itself into being able to produce some of the equipment that they are lacking, the capabilities that they are lacking. So there will be a sense of kind of flexible alliances in how to do this, but some components, such as the nuclear umbrella that the US provides, will be difficult to replace. So it's not just about defense at the US request, it's about now defense because they recognize that they may need to be tackling some of these issues alone. The second thing that they'll probably wrap into their foreign policy and the transatlantic relationship is to just accept the fact that our shared values are now in question. This was a common foundation because we are democracies, and we have said, yes, we share these values, but those values were exactly what Vice President Vance questioned in his speech in Munich. And so the question of whether European restrictions on free speech that are the result of their own history are something that is part of the shared value of free speech transatlantically is open. And that is important because of the development of tech and AI and some of the regulation that comes out of the EU. So we will see that there will be a question of how to craft a policy both within the EU and as Germany that will take account of some of these questions that the Vice President raised about the values that we share transatlantically. The third issue would be the fact that Germany, and Torsten, you said it yourself, is going to be looking for more of a voice within the European Union. That Franco-German motor has not really been running, or if it has been running, it has been hurrying along at a very low level. This is something that Friedrich Merz criticized, and if there is going to be a buildup of a European identity, then it will mean that Germany needs to get that motor going into a different speed, and perhaps also look at whether or not Poland would be also a relationship that they can repair and use to power some changes within the European Union itself. And I think this is particularly, again, a focus of as AI develops and as the Europeans regulate AI in addition to data, what does that mean for the future? The fourth is really kind of a cheat because it was something that was part of Trump 1.0, but I'll say it again, the transatlantic relationship will be more transactional. And that is something that we're seeing now as the discussion of tariffs goes forward. It's the question of security guarantees. If you're spending at 2%, does that mean that the collective defense is easier? Energy security, is this something where we are looking to see more European buys of, for example, US LNG? And I would just add that I don't think you can count foreign direct investment in the US into this equation in the same way that you maybe have done traditionally. And then there's the fifth item on, if I were sitting in the German MFA trying to craft up this transatlantic policy, I would say that it is possible to identify some areas where you could imagine cooperation would be possible, cooperation before these become points of contention. And one of them is, I think, Iran nuclear proliferation. Even though there's not the same commitment to this maximum pressure campaign that you saw in Trump 1.0, no one is interested in having a nuclear capable Iran. So this might be a good area for cooperation in the future. I would say that inevitably there will be a need for cooperation on China policy, difficult for Germany with its 5,000 companies that have interests in China. Difficult for Germany also when it's trying to look for areas where it might foster growth in the economy, and with many companies having a strong relationship with China. But there may be, because of the de-risking factor and because Germany has accepted some of the risks that are inherent there, including in Germany's China strategy, that might be an area where there is some possibility for good cooperation, again, before it becomes something where there could be contention. And then there's also the question of counterterrorism and support for Israel, where there could be some synergies that we could harvest in that area. So with that, I'm going to stop because I'm talking about Germany and the transatlantic relationship from the American side with my German buddies on the panel, and they may tell me that this is all just impossible. But I thought I'd lay that out there, again, drawing on the experience from the first Trump administration. And I'm going to stop there, Michael.
Thank you so much, Robin. Transatlanticism at work. within our very panel. Just to summarize very, sort of very quickly, implications for defense spending, nuclear posture within Europe, Germany, France on the one hand, Germany, Poland, perhaps a recalibration there, a transactional tone to the transatlantic relationship, and possible points of cooperation. Christoph, let's turn to you, and let's see what your key takeaways from the election are.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a great fun to do this with Robin, with you, Michael, and with Thorsten, and of course the audience. I have 2 points on which I would like to elaborate exactly more in the second. But so on first sight, many pieces of the political puzzle in our election fell into the right places. We can build a two-party coalition. There was a very high turnout. People are interested in it. The positive side is if Germany understands the situation, the seriousness of the situation, we should be able to cope with it and meet the challenges. And now comes the but. I'm not really sure that we are in our mindset already where we have to be in order to address the challenges. And here I come to my second point, and here I can only repeat what Thorsten said. The real serious security policy issues were not at all debated in our campaign. So people are not aware of it. You can doubt whether the political class, the people who have now to form the government, are aware of the seriousness of the situation. And what do I mean by that? I used my time here as a fellow to write a book in which I discuss the imminent threat that after an end of the Ukraine war, we have to face the next attack of Vladimir Putin, and this time it will be on the eastern front or eastern flank, however you want to do it, of NATO. And here, as a German, I especially look to Lithuania because Germany is the guarantee force of NATO for the protection of Lithuania, and we are no match at all to the Russian army at the moment, and will not be if we don't change course. So these are the two sides. On one hand, a certain optimism that yes, Germany can deal with crisis if it wants to, if it's aware of the seriousness. But the second part and the but is, are we in the mental stage already that we really see what is coming or what could be coming, and are we addressing these issues? And that would, of course, mean that we have to invest heavily in deterrence of Vladimir Putin, not in the sense that we want to deter him, but that he understands in his head that he is really deterred. And these are two very different things. Now, I have exactly my doubts whether the politicians taking part in the coalition negotiations have a clear view how dire and dangerous the situation is and will be in the upcoming 2 to 3 years. In Germany, we continue to focus far too much on domestic issues and do not address enough the security threats from the outside, especially from Russia. At least we are not doing it fast enough. We are already in an undeclared war on the eastern front of NATO. Data cables and energy pipelines are attacked on a regular basis, and we are confronted with cyber attacks. But the German mindset follows the binary thinking of a bygone era. Since we are not in a traditional shooting war, we live in peace. We don't live in peace. That's not true. We live in unpeace. And we are heading in the direction of even a shooting war if we don't prepare ourselves for that situation. And the only force at the moment that stands between us and a Russian attack on NATO's eastern front in Europe in 2 or 3 years is the Ukrainian army. That is the only thing which stands in between. And so I have also my doubt. We have here a certain moral hazard, how we look at the war in Ukraine and the deal-making of US President Trump. It's a brutal thing to say, but we have to be aware that as long as the Ukrainians are fighting, they buy us time, the lost time we have already spent, in order to prepare ourselves what is coming after the Ukrainian war. And if you talk to war gamers here in Washington, D.C., they will tell you at the today's planning level what the Bundeswehr contingent has to look like in Lithuania and how the Lithuanian army is prepared, they are no match for a Russian military, even if you acknowledge that the Russian military was not that successful in its war in Ukraine. We are, even for this not so good Russian army, we are not a match. If it comes to it, we don't have enough ammunition, we don't have the right weapons, so on and so on and so on. So this is, from my point of view, the biggest challenge for the new government, for the new coalition, that they really have to take this seriously. They haven't so far. There's also one thing in coalition talks traditionally like that in Germany. When it comes to the real tricky issues, you will not ask all the experts which are out there. They will be in the so-called Arbeitsgruppen and they do their preparation work. But when it comes to the question, where do we spend our money on? What are the priorities? According to German tradition, this is just a question for, let's say, 6, 7, 8 people, and this will be the party heads and maybe some Länderfürst, which means the prime minister of one of the Bundesländer, if he is also important in the party, and of course the social welfare guys. That is normally the core group when it comes to the last decisions. What are the priorities? What are the posteriorities? There will be no security politician in that group. And it has been like that in 2017, when we were already in a war in Europe after annexation of Crimea and the start of the war in eastern Ukraine. That was the case in 21, when everybody could see that we are heading into a big war in Ukraine because 100,000 troops, Russian troops, were standing at the border. It was no subject at all in the German campaign. And now I have the third time this déjà vu that we are heading into a direction what we not only have a war in Europe, but that we risk to have a war with the Bundeswehr involved, and we are not talking about it. We're not there, this threat. I stop here and only want to advertise that in 10 days, or no, less, 8 days from now, my new book, which is just pointing out that danger is to be published in Germany. It's called in English, no, first in German, Der schwarze Dienstag, the Black Tuesday. I have a scenario for the next election day in the US, which would be first Tuesday in November 28th. That would be a great day for Putin just to do that, because at that time he has enough time to regroup his armies after the end of the Ukraine war to attack in Lithuania. And America, of course, is not paying attention because they have the domestic problems, and we are not prepared. So why a war with Russia is imminent and how the new government can avoid it, that is the title of the book, and it's published on March 21st. And with that, I will finish my first remarks, and now I'm ready to be challenged on that dire perspective.
Absolutely, Christoph, thank you so much. Thanks to the three of you for such spirited and insightful opening remarks. Once again, for audience members, please send in your questions to the Q&A function, and I see that a number of you have done so already, so we'll get to your questions in just a second, but I did want to ask one question of each of our panelists before we turn to a more general conversation, and this is about the fabled Zeitenwende of 2022 in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And it seems to me that you can read the recent German election in two ways, meaning the election that just took place. And this is that there was a recognition in Germany in 2022 of how serious the situation was, of what the nature of Russian aggression was as a threat, not just to Ukraine, but to all of Europe writ large. Chancellor Scholz, coming from the SPD, traditionally a somewhat Russia-friendly party, rejected completely Wandel durch Handel, transformation through trade, and put Germany, Europe, the transatlantic relationship on a different footing, and began the transition that Chancellor Merz, assuming that he becomes the chancellor, is going to consolidate, and that this is a kind of upward trend line of greater commitment to defense spending, support for Ukraine, confrontation with Russia, et cetera. That's interpretation number one. Interpretation number two, which seems a bit closer to the spirit of your comments, Christoph, is that the Zeitenwende was quite superficial, that in terms of the big structural issues, it didn't really change much. We know that Russia is outproducing all of Europe when it comes to artillery shells. Russia, which has the economy the size of Italy, is sort of way ahead of Europe on defense production. And then you have all of the challenges that you just identified, Christoph, and others with defense of the Baltics, and the situation in the war is not ideal for Ukraine, sort of three years in, and a kind of lack of preparedness, and that even Chancellor Merz, who's I would say in the German context not unhawkish, even he is way behind the curve in terms of what's going to have to be done. So the Zeitenwende as a working proposition that's bringing Germany forward, or the Zeitenwende as a flop, and those seem to me the two different ways in which we could interpret the current situation. So I'll start with you, Torsten, and just go then quickly to you, Robin, and quickly to you, Christoph, for some thoughts about the Zeitenwende and the sort of basic trajectory of German foreign policy.
No, I think the skeptics have it right, that in terms of the implementation of this Zeitenwende agenda didn't live up to what was needed, especially in terms of gearing ourselves up for longer term confrontation with Russia, and most importantly, for being able to do so without being held by the hand of the US. And that's the contingency I think we didn't plan for. The irony of the relative success of Ukraine in terms of defending itself was that the sense of urgency in Germany decreased. I think everybody was really scared the first 2-3 weeks after Russia started the full-scale invasion. But once it turned out that the Russian forces weren't all that 5 foot tall and capable, I think the sense of urgency decreased. And I think the interesting thing now is that Trump being not even a transactional president, but a president bent on destroying what is left of the West, and having some sort of late imperial presidency with pretty eccentric characteristics. I think he's now triggering a serious rethink in terms of Germany's security posture. That probably should have happened 4 years ago, or 4 years ago already. Or you could argue it should have happened when Angela Merkel said in this beer tent that the times that we could fully rely on the US were over at the beginning of Trump's first term. So I do think right now there's a bit of an opportunity to do what is necessary, but of course it's not easy to implement, and the fiscal debates we're having in Parliament today, whether we can actually find the money for that, change the rules, are testament to that.
Thank you so much, Torsten. Robin, your thoughts about the profundity or superficiality of the Zeitenwende?
So I think that it's one of the kind of tragic aspects of the Zeitenwende, which is that it is a change in time. The Zeitenwende also takes time, and this is exactly what they did not have. They're building from a low base in terms of what they are trying to do and procure, and so I think the threat perception change is real. And even if that is morphing now into something about how Europe not only defends itself against a potentially resurgent Russia, but also how they would defend themselves absent US engagement, it is still a pivot point. And so what needs to happen is actually sustained effort to support action that would in fact address the issues that led to the call for a Zeitenwende, for more defense investment, for more capability, for more working together within the EU. And so the question is, and Torsten has identified it very correctly, will there be the political will to sustain that over time?
Christoph, I think I have a sense of where you stand on this question, but let's turn the floor back to you.
There are two types of Zeitenwende. There's one where we have success, and there's that one where it was just talk and it was all watered down. So the negative sign, of course, is Chancellor Scholz declared that a famous Zeitenwende just 3 days after the Russian invasion on Ukraine on a Sunday in the Bundestag. And one had the feeling, oh, now finally they have understood. And he promised that from now on it will be more than 2% plus the Sondervermögen. And that was all watered down. The military part of the Zeitenwende was watered down. There was another part which was only very not superficially declared in the Zeitenwende speech, and that was to get out of dependency on Russian gas. And there everybody in Germany thought, how is that possible? Of course, we made mistakes by increasing it from 35% or 36% in 2014 to over 50% in 2022. Yeah, that was a big mistake. And everybody thought, if we really try to get very quickly out of Russian gas, how will that work? Will we have enough energy to heat our houses in the next winter? How many companies will go bankrupt? How many people will lose their jobs? That was the mood in the spring and summer of 2022, that of course we can do the military stuff, but the hard part will be to get out of the dependency on Russian gas. But it just worked the other way around. We failed on the military Zeitenwende, and we did well in getting out even quicker and with less problems than everybody assumed. So here again, you have this pessimism, optimism thing. I'm ready to criticize harshly all the mistakes of Zeitenwende, what not has been done, but I also want always encourage the Germans and the political class. If we take a problem serious, if we put all our will and our resources and our administrational mind into it, we are able to cope with it. So I have a very dire scenario. If we continue on Zeitenwende like we did it with the Bundeswehr, then we are doomed. If we continue with Zeitenwende in the way how we handle dependency on Russian gas, then you can see that is a Mutmacher. Then you can encourage people. Yeah, it's doable. We can more than we even think we can do. So we need now this mentale Zeitenwende. We need a Zeitenwende in our heads. We have to accept the situation, the risks, as dangerous and dire as it is. But if we do that, if we have the real mental state, then I'm not pessimistic about the future. Then we could be able to deter Vladimir Putin, and the war, which I'm warning, is not necessary to come. We can avoid that, but really we have to do much, much more than we discuss at the moment in the Bundestag and in the coalition talks.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for all of those answers. What I'm going to do now, since we have a lot of questions from our audience, which is great, I'm going to ask 3 questions, and I'll go backwards now. I'll start with you, Christoph, and then turn to you, Robin, and then to you, Torsten. And please just answer whichever of the 3 questions you wish to answer. You're not obligated to weigh in on all of them. But first, from Zachary Suero, a question about the personal relationship between Merz and Trump. I do remember having been in Germany in the fall that there was some conversation about this, that if one put Merz in the chancellery, that he would maybe have an easier time dealing with Trump than Scholz would. So is that a proposition you would agree with? Second question from Thomas Simons, who's a former U.S. ambassador to Poland, is what it means to have an enhanced German-Polish relationship. And if you want to throw in, this was not Thomas's question, but if you want to throw in thoughts about an enhanced Franco-German relationship in that category, I think that would be apropos as well. And then finally, a kind of inside baseball question from John K. Lawrence about Boris Pistorius and his possible role. Christoph, you had mentioned, I think it was you, Christoph, who mentioned 6 to 8 decision makers on the key questions of German national security. Is it possible that Boris Pistorius will be one of them? For our audience, if you're not familiar with the name, this is the defense minister in the current government and an SPD politician. So I'll start with you, Christoph. The question about Merz Trump, the question about Poland, Germany, and the question about Boris Pistorius. Please answer which of them that you will, or all of them if you wish.
I will just say one sentence to two of them and more than one sentence to a third one. Merz and Trump, that can work much better than Scholz and Trump, but since he has been a manager for a US company, he probably deserves more respect from Trump than Scholz did. Pistorius, it's good that he is there. He should be the future man in the Social Democratic Party and in the parliamentary group, but he is not. As far as I see it, and I would be interested how Torsten sees, that I can't see that the majority of the Social Democrats stands clearly behind Pistorius. And now the question with the German-Polish relationship, or more general, the German-Franco, the state of Europe. I mean, where do we look at if we say Europe needs to do much more? The EU is not the right forum. I love the EU, and the EU has much more security guarantees on paper than even NATO, but it's not a military force. And the big disadvantage of the European Union is that it can't come quickly to a reliable decision, because we have the consensus principle, which means in practice, every of the 27 members has a veto when it comes to money, spending, and so on. So don't count on the EU. It's marvelous that Ursula von der Leyen want to put up an 800 billion euro package for defense in Europe. By the way, that is just the amount of money which the US spends in 1 year. In 1 year, okay? So even if 800 billion sounds big, it is not that big when it comes to buying military capabilities over years. My point is, we need a coalition of the willing, because you won't get quickly enough with the EU 27 to where we need to get, if we get there at all, with Viktor Orban and other people, Fico in Slovakia, maybe using their veto in order to slow down the process to deter Putin. So my coalition of the willing, that's enough. If that's 12 states, let's say Czech Republic, Poland, the 3 Baltic republics, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, which is not an EU member, but a very important part of my picture. And of course, then it's Germany, Germany, Germany. If Germany is not part of that coalition of the willing and quickly, then you can forget about it. But if the German government understands it and takes part in forming this coalition of round about 12 states, which are much closer to the eastern flank than France with its domestic problems, and Spain and Italy, who are all not that much interested to help Ukraine and really do something. These coalition of the willing would have 3 to 4 times the economic resources of Russia. So if this coalition of the willing is investing in deterrence quickly and with its economic resources, then again, we might get to a solution. If that's not happening, through the EU, it will be far too slow. And of course, here, German-Polish relationship is very important, and it might be more important than the German-Franco relationship. Don't count out Macron, but Macron has so many domestic problems. And France is in debt with more than 100% of the GDP. I just don't see where from France, in practical terms, there will come leadership, money, really sense of urgency of now. That is just, let's concentrate on these 12 countries, or around about 12 countries, coalition of the willing. Then we can do it in the time we have. And otherwise, it will be too late.
Christoph, thank you so much. So Robin, these 3 questions or any of them that you would most be eager to answer?
Sure, I'm going to start because Christoph has really drawn me in with his precision of a coalition of the willing, when I had talked also about sort of flexible alliances within that. So I've got that in my brain, Christoph, and I am chewing on it. It comes to the question of this relationship with Poland and with France. My thinking is, you not only need those flexible alliances and the coalition of the willing, but you also need the EU, right? I mean, at best, this is all hands on deck, right? And so what I would like to see is not only something where the relationship between Germany and Poland is repaired and removes some of the scratchiness that has held it up, but also that also moves it forward so that within the EU, they can work in their common interests and do more to move legislation and regulatory powers forward in the EU, or deregulation for that matter, but to move policy forward within the EU that is addressing some of the key issues for Poland and for Germany, and maybe for some of this flexible coalition as well. So I would like to see that overcome. I agree that it's the difficulty with France is that Macron does have quite a lot of domestic issues. On the other hand, especially with their intelligence capability and so forth, France can be an important player in any kind of conflict resolution. So I think ideally you would see that motor working as well. I'm gonna go to Boris Pistorius because it is rare that you get a defense minister that has high popularity ratings in Germany, right? And I'm going to say this because I'm not sure my German colleagues will. The defense ministry used to be the place that politicians were sent to, disappear. And now you have somebody who's really grasped this, and he's shown the willingness to tackle some of the issues that the defense ministry faces. So I give him kudos for his performance in that role. And I think it's good that he's engaged in this coalition agreement. I am a little worried about the defense ministry of the future, absent somebody willing to really dig in and address some of the problems that the defense ministry had over time. And I'll leave it there.
Karsten.
Look, on Merz and Trump, I'm in no position to predict what the relationship is. I also find it hard to have credible kind of evidence who clicks well with Trump and what works. But I think for our context, is it really important to state that Merz put forward a very realistic view of this administration, and he didn't mince words at all. And I think that's already a good starting point, that he's not naive about who he's dealing with. He at several points spoke out against the pro-AfD advocacy on the part of Musk and others. On election night, he said that we had interference in this election, both from Washington and Moscow, and he said so in the same breath. And most importantly, he did say that our goal, and that's a bit of a mouthful, needs to be kind of to step by step gain independence from the US, to stand on our own feet in terms of security. And he also opened up talking about Europeanizing the kind of nuclear protection umbrella with France and the UK. So whatever the relationship will be, I do think Merz, to his credit, has a fairly realistic view of who he's dealing with in the White House. During the election campaign in the early days, he said, like, Trump is a businessman, you can do business with him and so on, you can do deals. Merz has kind of changed his approach somewhat, because right now it's not clear whether anybody can do a deal with Trump, and be it on trade. He'll certainly continue to try, but I do think, to his credit, he has a fairly realistic view of what we're dealing with.
Martin, that's over and out from you then. Let me go to a bundle of 2 questions this time, not 3. And I'll start with you, Torsten, because I know that you have a time constraint, and then we'll go to Christoph and then to Robin. So the first question from Matthew Kennedy is about the role of the UK in German foreign policy. And it does seem to me, I'll offer a generalization of my own here, that many of the effects of Brexit have been kind of washed away in the last couple of weeks or last couple of months as other issues come to the fore, and as the UK seems to be showing a degree of leadership on questions of European security and also the war in Ukraine. So meaning that maybe Brexit is not the primary frame at the moment for Germany-UK relations, but that there's something else at work. So that's question number 1. And then this is a good question for you, Torsten, with a little tweak. This is from Benjamin Cross, and so about whether Germany might return to nuclear power after the decisions of previous Chancellor Angela Merkel to sever Germany from nuclear power, But I want to throw in one other question, because I know that you've written on the topic, and you just mentioned this as well, Torsten, about Europeanizing the nuclear umbrella. So not about nuclear energy and power, but about nuclear weapons, and whether there's really a fundamental shift in German thinking on this point. So UK plus the nuclear question writ large, and I'll start with you, Torsten, and then we'll turn to you, Christoph, and then to you, Robin.
No, great questions. Now, on the UK, I think we can just be grateful that we have the UK, and I do think Berlin is appreciating that. And not only now in light of Trump and the debates on Europeanizing the nuclear umbrella and having Britain as an integral part of the European security architecture, but already starting with Ukraine, where Britain did play a really important and crucial role. And I do think Germans appreciate that by and large. The whole Schadenfreude about Brexit not having gone so well economically, I think that's pretty much gone. We have no illusions about reversing Brexit, but I do think we have every intent to try to work with as closely as possible on the security front with the UK. And in terms of the nuclear question, and on the Europeanizing the nuclear umbrella, that's of course a tricky debate. Macron first raised that possibility in 2020 or 2018, and both Merkel and Scholz didn't engage him on these debates. It's also not 100% sure what Macron is willing to do, but I think it's good that Merz has now said we're open to discussions, and I want to discuss with the French president, also with the UK, on Europeanizing the nuclear deterrent. How that's being done, I wrote a piece in Foreign Policy this week on this. Everybody can read my musings on whether you can recreate the nuclear planning group at the European level and so on. Of course, this is not to get the US out, it's just as a plan B. I do think at this point it's irresponsible not to think about a plan B. And the danger of incentivizing the US to then leave once we start, thinking about a plan B, I think is less than not thinking about this right now. And as regards the return to nuclear power, I don't think we'll reactivate the nuclear power plants that we've just about decommissioned. But I do think, and the coalition the preliminary coalition agreement has that we do need to reinvest in civilian nuclear research. And once at some point in the future there are types of nuclear energy that are promising, and in terms of the risk-reward relationship promising, I do think Germany might reconsider. This government will not, I think, go back into nuclear power, but also since the old power plants are not particularly economical in terms of their models, but new models, small and modular reactors or fusion and so on. That's all about the future, but I do think Germany needs to recommit to the civilian nuclear research. Also, of course, in order to maintain or achieve nuclear latency, because Europeanizing nuclear protection is one thing, but what if at some point the strategic environment deteriorates so much that Germany needs to seriously consider that? I do think having civilian nuclear research and the basic capabilities in place cannot hurt in terms of the environment we're heading into.
Thank you so much, Torsten. And I would commend to our audience Torsten's recent article on nuclear questions, and would also link this article to the questions that Christoph was raising about deterrence and what deterrence means in 2025 vis-a-vis German troop presence in Lithuania, or the threat or challenge that Russia poses more generally. And it's just part of this interesting rethink now that's going on in the midst of the election and in the midst of a changing transatlantic relationship. Let me turn now to Christoph for these two questions, the UK question and the nuclear question, and then Robin will turn to you.
I start from the back. So nuclear power, I totally agree with what Torsten has said. Germany is not returning into nuclear power. It's one of the fields of German inconsistencies. We get out of coal and nuclear and are betting heavily on renewables, and knowing that in November afternoons there will not be sun and wind and over the winter, then we are happy to buy electricity, nuclear electricity from France and coal electricity from Poland. But we have a well-functioning European market on that, so it is not really an issue. It is just a very bad business for Germany, because we are producing a surplus of renewable power when the prices are low, and we are buying electricity from abroad when prices are high, because then our sun-wind model is not working. But every country has some inconsistencies. It is one of the special German inconsistencies. Nuclear weapons, here I have a very strong belief that Europe is no substitute for the American nuclear umbrella, and whatever is the direction of where the US is going when it comes to burden sharing in NATO, and Europeans have to be more reliable on the conventional side, and so on. Don't do this. Don't try to put in question whether the American nuclear umbrella is there for Europe or no. Otherwise, we get in deep trouble and in very dangerous situations, because first of all, the French and the British, they just have the big stick. They can level it. They can't react with a low response on a just tactical attack and go higher and higher. So you are at once in the moral hazard whether you respond with a big hit or you don't do it at all. And so that is not no security guarantee for Germany or Poland or the other countries to rely on a political decision in Paris, whether in the end they will do what they say they would be ready to do. And there's, of course, the whole political question that a next president from a different political party already today said that they will adhere. Even if Macron decides to do that, we don't know where we are in 5 years under a different French government. So we all should understand that that's no substitute. We shouldn't go there. I understand Torsten's point that we need a plan B, but the plan B should be better than what we can get from France or the UK. And the last point, we have a lot of negative developments, but there are a few very positive ones, and that is the Polish election 1.5 years ago, and we have a partner in Poland. And the other thing is how the UK still feels responsible for the security and the balance on the continent. Also, they are much further away geographically than France and Italy and Spain, on which we can't count really from my point of view. So it's great that we have the UK. But if you look at the capabilities of the UK, you see the whole European problem. The British Army has now 80,000 soldiers. It's less than the seats in the Wembley Stadium. How many could they send for a peace force to Ukraine? I mean, we would need 100,000 troops. And Germany was in its best days able, on a rotating basis, to send a few thousand somewhere abroad. The British would be able to send a few thousand. The French, not depending on willingness. So here you see the whole problem. We are not at all near the level we have to be. And so we have to use the remaining time to very quickly get to decisions and solutions, and to just be, in practical terms, much better on this conventional side. I'm happy that the British are there, that the UK is politically willing and feels responsible for the security on the continent. It would be much worse if they were not, but overall, yeah, you understand my point. Europe is not there where it needs to be and will not be over the next 2-3 years, which makes the urgency of doing things getting forward even bigger.
Thank you so much, Christoph. Robin, let's turn to you, and I think that this will be the concluding set of remarks for today's conversation. Not that we couldn't go further in terms of these questions and the topic, but that's the kind of time constraint that we're under. So, Robin, the UK question and the nuclear question.
I'm leaving the question of Germany's nuclear energy commitment to my German colleagues because they understand this. It has puzzled Americans throughout, but I accept that they know that better. And I'm going to go, though, to the UK and its role. And this is something where I agree with Torsten, the Brexit question and the scratchiness around that, that was then, this is now, okay? Everybody's in Europe just has like accepted, okay, this is a new relationship, fine. And they're going to move forward and make it as effective as possible. And I think that is also the attitude that you are seeing from the new Labour government, that, they want to ensure that they have a good relationship with Europe, not readdressing the Brexit question, right? And so in some ways, this is an advantage in that the Conservatives always had that post-Brexit hangover as something that they needed to address. So Keir Starmer has stepped up, even though his government is only 6 months in place, and he's stepped into a role where the UK has consistently seen itself as a security player on the European field. It is what the Conservative government had also stated as Brexit went forward. We will remain engaged in European security, strong NATO ally, all of this. They showed it on Ukraine. So this is consistent across the board. I agree with Christoph entirely on the question of capabilities. It's something that the Labour government in the UK is also now dealing with. How do they fund that? And they put forward a proposal to do that, to raise their defense spending to 2.5%. But the cuts that happened during austerity budgeting have also weakened the capabilities of the UK. So capabilities is the shared issue for both the German government and for the UK government. And I'll leave it there, Michael.
Robin, thank you so much. Let me once again urge our audience to dig into Canon Institute and Global Europe program writings on these topics. We're going to be covering them for a long time to come, and it will be a subject of future discussions and podcasts. Christoph, I'm happy to make another plug for your forthcoming book, which is highly relevant to the topic. Thank you so much to our speakers for illuminating the ironies of an election in Germany that was not about national security in the run-up, but is going to yield a government in Germany that's going to have to deal in all the ways that you've outlined with very deep and difficult questions of national security. It reminds me structurally a little bit of the election of 2000 in the United States, which was an election about domestic politics, and yet George W. Bush in his 2 terms was really preoccupied with national security and with foreign policy. So that does happen. It does seem to be the case in Germany, and for shedding such an interesting light on it. Thank you so much to our speakers. And with that, I will sign off. And thanks very much to our audience for joining in for today's discussion.